Hello, my name is Levi, and this is the Wax Poetic Podcast. Welcome. My guest today is Henry Mouat, and we are going to be talking about
The Fragile by 9 Inch Nails.
Where were you in life when this album came into your life?
This was end of my college years in New York. I should say when I started in New York, I was at top of the world. I was so happy. This was pretty much all of my dreams. And then slowly New York City takes your dreams and just crushes you under them. So by the end of this time, I was really had lost a lot of my confidence, didn't know what I wanted to do out of life. And so I started really getting into 9 Inch Nails, which is the music of angst, but not sad, soulful love boy angst, just deep existential hard rock angst.
Yes.
And so I was going through pretty much their whole discography, and this was the album that leapt out to me the most because it takes place after his really big album, The Downward Spiral, which is literally about someone self-destructing. And this is kind of the album about rebuilding yourself, more or less. You can find a lot of those themes in there. And there are a lot of fun rock songs, but also a lot of stuff that really helped me just get in the zone of we're gonna make it through this, In
my notes for this, there's a bunch of songs that I wrote self-doubt because it seemed like a lot of the lyrics were about, man, I'm trying, but the world is just pushing back at me.
Yeah.
And you said that, you were living in New York at the time when you got into this one.
Yeah.
All right. And you had just finished college, or were you still going to college? Or just...
This was my final year is when I know I was really getting into this album. Freshman and sophomore year were the golden years. And then junior year was just brutal. I lost multiple friendships. I had some friends with mental health issues and some friends who had suicide attempts. It was just absolutely kicked me while I was down. And I also just took way too many projects at one time. So I just kind of got overwhelmed on all fronts. And so here I go for my final year. I'm just trying to make it out and, turning up the volume on some good dark stuff. I mean, that's the beauty of Trent Reznor is you're here's a guy who's been through it all, but he's trying to make it out.
The one song, La Mer, it is actually, when I read up on this, he said that he went to a beach house and he was going to kill himself. That was his thing. He was I'm just going to go ahead. I'm just going to kill myself. And that was the one song that he wrote from that. This whole album it's about man, I'm at the end. What do I do? Where am I going? And there's a lot in here. It's a very dark album.
Dark and sprawling. It's a double album. There's so much in there. He honestly meanders, maybe a little too much, but still.
Yeah, there's a lot of instrumentals. I do feel some of the instrument. Actually, there's an instrumental. What is it? Complication. That's probably my favorite instrumental. I mean, this is going off, but it felt very much like a '90s Prodigy kind of
dark pop.
If there was a fun part of the album, it was that song.
Yeah, it's that one. You have to wait a couple hours in to find it, but it's there.
It gets there. When you told me the album, I was The Fragile. I was trying to think of what songs were on this album, and I think We're in This Together was the hit, I guess.
Yeah,
the big song.
I would also say The Day the Whole World Went Away. Those are two songs that this is gonna sound silly, but that I remember hearing in movie previews and being ooh, what's this thing? I think Day the Whole World Went Away was Terminator Salvation. So, also dark, edgy. And then We're in This Together they used for the first Avengers movie. It attracts the action genre.
Well, I've noticed a couple of themes on this. A lot of the songs seem to be from the view of an outsider. The world is against him and he just and a lot of those things, when people have mental illness problems, that's how it feels the whole you second guess everything, every conversation that you have with people. You think, oh man, nobody likes me and all that stuff, but you genuinely feel that. And even though that may not be true, but you know, okay, I lost myself there. But yeah, it's a lot of it is from the outsider, and you just like doubt yourself. And, I assume you felt like that, during the time outside of college.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, this definitely carried on after I graduated too. Then things even got more hectic, but this certainly started when didn't really feel my like place in the school or my place in the world anymore. It was like I'd invested so much of my hopes and dreams and personality into this place, and it actually wasn't really what I wanted anymore. So I was just like totally lost, but still had like the fire to make stuff or be creative, but at the same time, but like what? Towards what? And this is definitely an album about someone who's like
trying
lost.
To find their place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you feeling like you felt like you were in the right place there? I mean, apparently you didn't really, you kind of lost it for New York there. You weren't feeling it. So
I say this about New York a lot. Songs become like a catchphrase. New York City is a sexy but abusive relationship. So at first you're like, this is everything I've ever wanted. I'm living the dream. And then once enough time has gone on, you kind of wake up one day and realize just how unhappy you are, like just how put down you've been for like years at a time. And then you're suddenly aware of it. And that's when you've gone true goth.
when you find your true goth self.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about this album, it is a messy, but it's still a concept album. Tells a story from beginning to end of this guy going through it. And that was always also like really helpful because it had like a structure as opposed to someone just feeling upset and writing songs about being upset, writing 20 or 30 songs, however many are on this album. He's taking you through the whole process. So there is this like really galvanizing first act. One of my favorite songs in the album is The Fragile. And the main chorus line of that is, I won't let you fall apart. And at first you're like, that's like kind of singing this hard rock love song, like very intense and angsty, but like I get it. But you realize he's actually not singing that to a person. He's singing it to himself, that this is his like rallying cry of like, okay, like I'm going to fight for myself here. But then the album goes on and gets more complicated. Like it's not so easy as just being like, I'm going to do this. Now I win. That's only like halfway through the first CD. And then things get darker. Then Lemaire shows up a few songs after that. And you're like, oh, which is also helpful. Like you'll find in real life, you find yourself going through a funk and then one day you're like, I'm going to turn this all around. And then you might sink even lower before figuring out like, okay, I need to do something like a major change. I don't know.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what it takes to make a change in your life is just just hitting that bottom, just realize, oh man, this is going completely the opposite of where I wanted to be right now.
Yeah, precisely. I love my next favorite song in the album is also literally called Into the Void. Previous songs or so before this are talking about how he's like going deep within himself, like the great below or the way out is through. He's visually describing this as this like deep internal journey through his own issues, through his own traumas. And then at a certain point, he's literally talking about how he's like lost in it. And you're like, oh boy. I mean, the song's a banger, so it's like a fun one to listen to, but the whole thing is telling you like this is not supposed to be easy, which when you're in that big of a funk is honestly pretty liberating to hear, as opposed to like, yeah, you're going to turn it around and be great. And instead it's like, no, like this is the war.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because whenever I'm doing this, I go through every song and I write a little note about what I felt, what I thought the song was about, what I got from it. Yeah. And Into the Void was the only song that I wrote nothing for because he's saying some stuff, yes, but it's very difficult to wrap your head around. Yeah. If you listen to his surface just as a song, oh, it's great.
Yeah.
When you really delve down into what's going on there, what he's saying, it's a mind bender.
It's dark. What also I love about that one, which is also pretty dark, is that it starts with a variation on the tune from La Mer. Yeah, he takes that, he starts the song that way, and then he builds on it and turns it into a totally different beat. But this is like a classic Nine Inch Nails trick where he's actually tying in ideas that he's already brought up and then you're like, whoa.
Something I noticed, you mentioned earlier about this isn't an album that you just pick a song and listen to. You really have to listen to the whole thing just straight through.
Or
and you get that
chunks at a
whole
time.
mood. There's a lot of songs that just fade into each other. It does feel like a story. It takes you through the whole little, there's movements, and it feels, okay, I'm going to say musical, but I don't mean it like a musical.
No,
but like
sure.
in a musical, they have the opening song, and it kind of throws about a bunch of themes into the mix and lets you hear them for a couple of seconds, and then later on, other songs within the soundtrack kind of like play out, and you hear that repeating theme. And there is that theme in La Mer is repeated throughout the album, like in a couple of songs. It does play off of that, so if you're listening closely, you can catch all that.
And then you get really excited when you do, because you realize there's a reason you've been listening to this thing so long, and you're like, oh, it's not just angsty or like miserable or angry or whatever. You're like, oh no, he's trying to tell me something, or he's giving me something to chew on here.
It's not a simple album. It's very dense.
And it ends on an instrumental called Ripe with Decay, which is about as like terrifying a name as you can get. It's not peaceful, it's not like happy at all, but it's also not defeated either. And that always left me with something too. It was like, you've been with this thing for so long, going through this musical, emotional like journey, and then it kind of leaves you. I've always interpreted it as when you get to the end of the line of all this like self-introspection and like figuring yourself out, you're actually going to be, I don't want to say weaker or like in pain, but you're like not going to be just like, all right, you're actually probably going to emerge from it pretty raw, but you've been released.
Yeah, and that kind of touches on the second theme that I noticed. It's a lot of change. Well, most change happens when you might be comfortable, like even if it's within a relationship where the relationship might be over, but you're still like, oh, I'm cool, this is fine, but the rest of the world and the other person might think otherwise. But a lot of change happens when you're not ready for it, and that's just how it is and how you deal with it. When you left New York, did you come directly to Austin, or was there a middle? Or
no, between maybe like New York was the downward spiral, and then everything after that was the fragile, as far as like rebuilding yourself or like dealing with the unpleasant change. Downward Spiral is like the big 9 Inch Nails album. Also tells a story about a person, it's funny you say relationship, who kind of like suddenly gets ejected from a relationship and tries to pivot from it by just like not caring about their feelings anymore, and it turns them into this nightmarish monster, and it like totally ruins their life. And then The Fragile comes as his next album, and just like starts with this person like trying to pick up the pieces and like figure it out. And then 7 years later you get back to the fun stuff. No, when I graduated, I went back home to California. I had like a summer job at a summer camp teaching kids. It was really fun. And then when that ended, I think I had about 3 or 4 or 5 months of like not working at all. And those were like some of the darkest days ever, because you're just held down when you're not doing anything, when you certainly don't have a job and you're living at your mom's house unemployed. The inertia is crushing. You stop believing you were ever capable of doing anything. Yeah. And then finally I one day woke up and had enough of it and like got a job in a week. Like it literally was just me like licking my wounds. And then I had a job for 5 months, and I saved up money and then moved to Berlin for a year, which is super wonderful city. Honestly, very dark, a wonderful place, wonderful people, but it also is haunted by all kinds of intense history. Just the last 100 years alone is crazy. And then it's been around for hundreds of years before that. And so kind of everyone in the city is like a little bit more somber. So that was like a really good place. Also, David Bowie lived there for a while, and he wrote some of his like weird, darker albums that are kind of like The Fragile, like weird instrumentals.
That last album that he wrote was so dark.
Yeah.
Was it Dark Star? Yes. That was,
or Black Star.
Black Stars, man, I listened to that, and that's a very dark Bowie album, but it was really good.
He's making the album of a man reckoning with his impending mortality, which is obviously dark emotions to go through, but he's doing it so honestly. And I guess that's what I really like about Trent Reznor and 9 Inch Nails, is that they're not trying to be angsty to appeal to like teenage boys and girls, really honestly trying to like figure out what's going on with him, which is what makes it so cathartic. Even when like it's industrial, it's pretty intense, sometimes honestly quite ugly music, but like it's filled with so much meat and like energy, power. Like it's very cathartic if you're in a similar headspace or a similar emotional space. It took me a year in Berlin to have finally rebuilt myself to the point that I moved to Austin. That was like a good year or two after I left New York.
What was it about Austin? Felt like the right place?
Well, for one, it's a good film town. I didn't want to go to LA or New York because I figured I would just replicate what I experienced in New York, and I wasn't ready for that. This next one throws a lot of people off, but honestly, Austin seemed like the closest I could get to Berlin while living in America. As far as like Berlin is it's very open to artists and creatives and like being yourself and being as weird as you want to be, and like that being totally okay. Austin, in its own way, honestly, in a totally different way, but from where I was at the time, in its own way, was also promoting that, but then also had opportunities for me to get back into making movies or stuff like that.
The last theme that I noticed was apparently his grandmother died right before the making of this album. So a lot of the songs were kind of pushed from that. But it seemed like there was a lot of stuff just confronting death, which I think scares a lot of people. It scares me. Don't ask me to go to the doctor because I don't know. I'm not prepared for what he's going to say or what they're going to say.
Which were the songs that spoke about death to you the most?
The song is literally called I'm Looking Forward to Joining You.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's when I die, hey, I'm ready. Yeah, and that feels very much like just making peace with it. It's a tough thing. I don't know if you've lost people close to you, but it's weird how people react to death and how they react to that and what comforts them.
I wasn't going through anything like that at the time, but I do think I approached that song here and there of just like welcoming the darkness. And I don't mean like death. I don't mean like in a suicidal way. Just like for so long you're like unhappy, but you're also very afraid of worse unhappiness. What if this metastasizes? What if this becomes mental illness or whatnot? And there's like a weird, like obvious darkness, but like release, just being able to say like, I'm going to go into that. I mean, usually, you don't come to that song frequently. It's not just like, I'm going to wake up and like pop that one in. That's always sort of how I interpreted it. Just letting go of the fear, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to look at it. One of the other songs that I really liked was Pilgrimage.
Oof.
It's mostly an instrumental. There's some like chanting and stuff. Kind of love that song though.
It's cool.
It's a cool song. When I think about pilgrimages, I'm like, well, that's like a once in a lifetime experience, apparently, is what you're supposed to do with a pilgrimage, I guess.
Right. Find the holy place and like make your feet or deal with your stuff. Fits with the album. Also, just like the imagery I get from that song, it sounds like kind of heavy metal in parts, but then other parts there's trumpets playing there that kind of sounds like medieval fantasy. Yes. I've always sort of had these weird daydreams when I hear that one of some, Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch.
Yeah.
I always see these like crazy hellscape, like march, like parades of all these like weird monsters and Trent Reznor just being like carried along through them. Like that's how I imagine he's feeling at that point.
He's leading a parade, or all these monsters are following him.
Yeah, or he's being swept up in it. And he's like, I have to go make my peace. But he's just surrounded by like
they're calling me. Let's go.
Yeah.
Is there one song on here that just like really speaks to you, even now, given some distance?
I think the two that I brought up, both the Fragile, that's become the Pavlovian reaction is kind of too bloated a term, but like that's my like dog clicker. If you're really having a bad day, listen to that song and it like reminds you of all the like tough times you've been through that you overcame, and you're like, whatever I'm going through right now, like I'm gonna get through it. And then again, Into the Void again is also so, when you get into the lyrics, is so dark, but the music itself is so poppy. Oh,
yeah, I know. It's got this weird, like, yeah, it's got a weird roll.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's amazing. Yes.
Which becomes fun when you're like maybe in kind of a dark mood, but you're not going to let yourself get down by it. You're just going to like headbang it out or like get into a groove anyway and like keep on going.
And that's sometimes all you need. If you're like feeling down, man, just get some movement in your body. Just like, I don't know. I think Taylor Swift said it, shake it off, but with your head. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that is what headbanging is all about, is literally shaking it off. all the tension you've built up is in your head and neck and shoulders, and you have to throw yourself into it.
Oh man, I miss having long hair now. It was a good time. Henry, I got another question for you. Can you sing your favorite line from this album? You don't even have to sing it. You could just hum it or air guitar it.
Ooh, favorite line.
Yeah.
Melody or like actual lyric, like
however you want to interpret that question. It could just be like a you know.
I don't know how I'll be able to sing it. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
Gotcha. Nice.
This is chill.
Also want to know, outside of Nine Inch Nails, do you remember like the first album that you bought for yourself?
It might have been Get Born by Jet. That's the album that has Are You Gonna Be My Girl? I think that's the song that survived. I think that might have been the first. Honestly, it could have been In Sync, No Strings Attached, but I'm sure I just asked my parents and they bought it for me.
Well, we'll say it's Jet.
Yeah, precisely. We'll rewrite history a little bit.
We'll put it down as that's the truth.
Yeah.
Henry, what have you been up to during COVID? We're in the COVID era.
In the COVID era.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Staying creative, like always writing every day, playing guitar every day, like doing this and that. So, I work in the film industry and I was only like just finding my legs when this went down. So I sort of got like booted back to square one. So I like here and there you find some work and then you just spend another month tooling away, but always keeping like the goals clear. So I keep doing regular acting classes and recently got into the habit of making short films, just super cheap, just with like two of my closest friends. We can make something that we all get excited about and throw a lot of passion into without spending $1 besides buying food. Like really
watch some nuggets.
Yeah, precisely. And that's been super helpful. You could certainly make the argument that it's like detaching from reality a bit, but at the same time, there's like only the hard truth about COVID is that there's only so much we can do right now. There's so much out of our hands that like, you just have to figure out how to
keep it
on. Yeah. Like keep on doing something, stay grounded. And that's how I've been hanging in there, is like focusing on personal goals and being creative, making stuff.
I feel that. For my last question, what have you been listening to lately?
Let me pull out my iPod because I'm drawing a blank.
Wait, did you just say iPod?
Oh, yes. I got an iPod Touch 2nd generation maybe 10 years ago. And ever since, if that one dies, I just buy another one. I'm all about it. Don't worry about Spotify. Don't worry about the internet. It's just... it's my iPod, my music device.
I can't complain with that.
If you haven't picked it up by my obvious time spent with Nine Inch Nails, I'm all about the dark stuff. So we just survived an Austin summer, which for me is the darkest time of the year.
It is a brutal summer. That was like 2 months of 100 degrees.
Yeah, the heat just takes away your like will to do anything. But then it's so sunny, you feel like it's your fault for not getting out there.
Yeah, no, I can't function when it gets 90 degrees. I lose all functionality in my body.
So I was listening to Alice in Chains, which is another descent into the darkness. I didn't stay in that one very long. I really like those guys musically, but that is literally people singing about death and drug addiction. I just can't hang out with it forever.
Yeah, I feel you.
I will say, most recently, this sounds like it's getting off topic, but it's not. I played this old video game, Brutal Legend. You played that one?
Oh, I remember. No, I never played it, but I remember Jack Black.
It's like a classic kind of like 80s fantasy story. A regular Joe gets sucked into a world of magic, and in that world, he's the chosen one who has to save the people and kill the evil king. So it's that, but the regular dude is Jack Black. and he gets sucked into a world of heavy metal. Like everything in the world is themed around like heavy metal. There's like mountains of bones, and like it's very funny and like goofy. And it has a very impressive like 100-song catalog of like Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest and Motorhead and Mastodon and like all of the heavy metal that the creators were into.
It's every teenage boy's fantasy.
Teenage boy fantasy, but because it's Jack Black leading you through it, you go into it with this like kind of giddy schoolboy like excitement of like, oh, like this is cool. So after that, I got, Dragon Force Through the Fire and Flames, just like really intense, but like fun. That's what kept me going in the last days of August and September was like, if you don't want to go outside, just blast some extremely fast-paced music that forces you to move. And then you have a very quick walk and then you're done.
Oh.
Yeah. What have you been listening to?
I've listened to almost every day is this band called the Lawrence Arms. It's called the Lawrence Arms Skeleton Coast. I feel like they speak to me. It feels like drinking music. It's a great band though, if you really get into it.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out. Anything with skeleton in the title, I'm sold.
All right, Henry. This was fun. But thank you, Henry, for coming on. And, maybe we'll have you back for some stuff and we'll do.
Heck yeah. Thanks for having me. I'll try to think of something upbeat next time. I was honestly trying to think if I'd listen to any happy music.
When I've asked people to do this, I'm like, if your album is like the Chipmunk Christmas album, it doesn't matter. Whatever questions I ask you are going to come from somewhere. Don't worry about whatever album it is. That's secondary to whatever questions I'm going to ask. But anyway, thank you, Henry.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, dude, this was great.
Please check us out every other week, and also go ahead and follow us on Facebook at Wax Poetic Podcast.